My name is Larry Wade. I'm the head of two groups here, the Oregon Carvers Guild and the Carving Special Interest Group of the Guild of Oregon Woodworkers. So we have a bunch of clubs up here, including two wood turning clubs, and the carving happens in basically all three of them. I want to welcome you. I want to encourage you to sit back and relax and think about questions to ask Rick. You can ask the questions in chat. It's the simplest way, and I'll monitor the chat and I'll try to feed them. But there will be Rick will do some talking. We'll play some video clips, and after every video clip or after his talk, we'll pause and ask for questions. And I'd like to encourage dialogue when we can, because as much as we're going to learn from Rick, we also learn from each other. And there's, your experiences are going to be different, not necessarily better, but they might be better for somebody. So the more we can make it interactive, the better off we're going to be. You notice Jerry Boone on the screen. Jerry's now in Mesa. He lives half the year in the Portland area, but he came up with this idea initially of focusing on a power carving. And we tried to put a dedicated power carving topic together, but I realized that bird carvers and mammal carvers and fish carvers do power carving. So we kind of trying to do a twofer. But thank you, Jerry, for tackling that. The video is done by Roger Crooks. Roger and I drove up to see Rick before Christmas and got the video done, and Roger edited it. And Roger's in the hospital, and he's got serious issues, if you haven't heard. And if you know Roger, he's been struggling with blood infection issues for several years, and he's now really whacked, and he's quite serious. I want to acknowledge Roger and the work that he did for this. This weekend is the Coastal Carver Show in Lincoln City, weather permitting, but weather will happen. I'm going to go. Judy, you're going to go, I think, right? So we'll do the trek and try to avoid the ice and snow and get there, but that's an important show. As is the Capital Carvers in Salem has a show on April 6th and 7th. We do the gathering of the guilds, which is a different kind of experience, but still an opportunity to see a lot of woodworking in the middle of April. And then the Columbia Flyway show that Rick will talk about a little bit more is in September on the weekend of the 21 and 22. And these are all major opportunities to see significant carving that's going on. Next month's program will probably be on Nora Hall. I've coined the phrase notable carvers in Oregon, and I used to think there were about 15 notable carvers, and now there's at least 50. And by either past or present tense, that there are people that have done just a significant amount of work. They're carvers, they're leaders, they're known nationally or locally, they're authors or whatever, or teachers. Judy Caldwell is one of them, obviously very well-known carver amongst us. And I'm not going to acknowledge everybody, but Rick Fry is also one of those by virtue of the work that he's done and the leadership that he does. I met Rick over the transom about 2.5 years ago as we were putting programs together, and had this idea of doing one on bird carving, and asked him if he would do that. And he said, well, I would be happy to help, but you might want to ask Don Baer first. So Rick made the introduction to Don, and we did a program with Don about 2 years ago. Because Don was a major influence in the Columbia Flyway show and bird carving, particularly in bird carving education in this area. And we did a shop tour. We did all kinds of interesting things. And I wish we had an opportunity to do a repeat and do more, but he unfortunately passed away. And so we were not able to do that. But if you're interested in this world as we dive into it, just be aware there is a recorded program that we did. It's posted on our website, now on our YouTube channel. And I know some of you have taken classes from him. The Feather and Quill organization exists to produce the Columbia Flyway and Wildlife Show, as I understand it. Correct me if I'm wrong, Judy and Rick. But the Feather and Quill organization is a separate nonprofit. They have a board of directors and leadership team, and they have membership, and they produce this really high quality show that's been going on for 30 years. It's quite a long time. And it's used to be in the Vancouver area, moved to Astoria a couple of years ago, in the reemergence out of COVID. And it's a mind-boggling experience to see the depth and breadth of bird and mammal and wildlife carving. It's just humbling. I almost want to go and not become a carver because it's you're looking at the quality of the carving and the painting is really pretty amazing. So Rick, I met him at that, and I'm going to we'll start the program and I asked Rick to introduce himself in the sense of how he got started in carving, how he got started in bird carving, and sort of how his focus is narrow or broad based on that. I'm going to spotlight him. And after that, we're going to do a series of about 15-minute videos. And I'm going to do them in video format because we condensed them and got a lot more packed in to that time. The first one is kind of an introduction to the world of bird carving, sort of the breadth and depth of what it looks like, the terminology, and then look at materials and the painting side of it. We'll do a shop tour for 10 minutes. He's got quite a substantial shop. And then there's about 18 minutes on power carving and sort of tips and techniques on safeties. We'll see how the Q&A goes. I have another about 15 minutes of excerpts from a significant video called Fur, Feathers, and Fin that Boredom produced. And in the post meeting, I will send you the links to all that stuff. And so you'll be able to watch those videos and look at it to your heart's content. But a lot of us, myself included, did not know of the existence of those, and they're terrific resources. So that's it. Let me just take a peek at the chat and then we'll see what's going on here.
Larry, while you're looking at at the chat, make sure that some point put my email address and my telephone number. If I can help, I'm happy to do that. And if I can't help, I know somebody that can help. So,
and Rick and I were chit-chatting about ways to encourage people to move into the world of at least experiment with bird carving or mammal carving, more realistic carving. And I hypothesized that we have quite a lot of people doing stylized birds. And if you do a little bit less stylized, you get a little bit more realistic. And that might be a path. And so Rick might help us do that. We'll talk a bit about that. So Rick, how did you get started in carving? How did you get started in bird carving? How did you fill your shop with all this stuff?
well, first of all, thank you everybody for joining us. This is exciting. We have our Columbia Flyway show. We have regular meetings, and this is how we meet Zoom because the leadership team comes from throughout Oregon. In fact, one of our leadership team members is in England. And so we meet and we chat, and what a great learning tool. My background is an educator. So I began 2 years as a junior high school teacher. I moved to high school. I was a high school teacher for 14 years, a basketball coach, a boys basketball coach, coached other sports, and then took the route into administration, became a high school principal at 2 different school districts. And then the last 16, 17 years, I was superintendent of schools in 2 different districts, one in the state of Washington and one in Oregon. So education and what we're doing in our schools interests me. And actually, that's where I got my start as a carver. As a high school principal, I had a superintendent who was carving decoys. And I thought, my goodness, I love that. I kind of used to when I was a youngster in high school and first out of college. I did I duck hunted elk and deer, but that's kind of all went to the wayside now. And so, but my interest was there. And when I was working with him, I saw this beautiful artwork, but yet it appealed to me. I am not an artist, at least I didn't consider myself one, but this beautiful artwork and this waterfowl. And I said, I want to learn how to do that. The challenge for me is finding the time to do that. As a high school principal at the time, spent a lot of time at school, and I loved almost every minute of it. I loved that job. I loved being in education, but I started dabbling a little bit. I found a class in Astoria to take, and was able to carve my first decoy. And now you tell me if I start running over time here, because
You're fine. No, you're fine.
I do chat. I like to chat probably a little bit too much, but I wanted to show you here. Is that coming up on your screen?
It is, yeah.
Okay, that is the first bird that I ever carved. And I remember going to this class, and he was talking about a teal and a mallard and a pintail. And I just want to carve a duck. And so this was the first one that I ever carved. And even though I say I've only been carving for 10 years, which I have been seriously, I dabbled a little bit when I was working, but I had a difficult time finding time to really do that. So to me, it was beautiful. But you know, as time went along, I found out there were some things that I needed to do to probably get better. And so as I was finishing up my career in the superintendency, I found Don Bear, who was in Vancouver, Washington, which is about a 2-hour drive from Astoria. We would go up there. Well, first I went on my own. He had weekly classes in the evening, so I'd go up for a 2 or 3 hour class. And the way his classes were set up, you tell him what you wanted to do, and then he would help you. But he also had other students, so it was a long learning curve. But then 10 years ago, I retired, and I said, I want to do this. I want to carve and learn how to paint and do this and be proud of the things that I do. And so I got online and started looking across the United States for people who taught, and it led me from Astoria, Oregon to North Carolina. And I went down there, flew down there, and spent 8 days with Kirkman. Well, his name just went right out the window there. His wife is Bev. She cooks good, great Southern food, but spent 8 days there. And I went to the World Championships. And I don't know if you're familiar, but in the world of bird carving, there is something called the Ward World of Bird Carving Championships. And this is held every year in Ocean City, Maryland. And I'm just going to just give you a peek here of, if I can find the, there we are, my screen share. That's not the one that I wanted. Go right there. Okay. Now, am I sharing the screen there?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so this is the Ward Foundation. This is in Ocean City, Maryland. They have the Ward World Championships, and Ward is named after a couple of brothers called the Ward brothers, who were in the Maryland area. They're famous carvers now. Of course, they're both passed away, but they began carving because they were carving decoys to hunt with. And as other people looked at what they were doing, they said, well, I want to buy some of your decoys. And so it kind of spread. But this year will be the 53rd annual one. It's a 3-day event in Ocean City, Maryland. And so the next 7 years, I went every year. The first 2 years that I went to this competition, I never entered a bird. But after that, I began bringing my birds and entered as a novice. And the cool thing about what's going on, this is a picture of the showroom floor. It's just kind of coming through. You can see there are a lot of people that attend there, and it truly is the World Championships. They come from all the world. There's all kinds of divisions that they compete in, from floating hunting decoy to highly decorative birds. And so began going there. And the nice thing there was that I found about carvers, and I'm sure that you found the same thing, is amongst the carvers, what a nice group of people. Go up and ask them, bring my bird over and say, what can I do to help here? What can you do what suggestions you make? And I always brought my phone with me. And every time somebody gave me a critique of one of my birds, I had this here, and I asked them if they would mind if I videoed it. because I really didn't know all the things that they were talking about. And so that was a tool that I used. We always went, after my second year, I brought a partner of mine with me, and he and I went 3-day class, and then there were seminars every day. And so I got this enthusiasm about carving. And when I come home, I was really gung ho and wanted to get started. And so to me, when I say I've been carving 10 years, I want to explain what that is. That means a 40-hour week out in my shop, at least pretty much 11 months out of the year. I take all of August off because it's salmon fishing here in the state of Oregon on the Columbia River, and my brother and I go fishing every day for salmon. And then September is our show, and so that takes up pretty much a lot of my time in the month of September. But those other months, I'm out in my shop, and I'll spend 40+ hours a week because I love being out here. And so the last 10 years has been serious. I've traveled. I've been fortunate because I've been able to meet carvers at the World Championships. I've been able to go to their homes. I've been to North Carolina, Maryland, Minnesota, Toronto, Canada, Alberta, California, Upper Washington, working with some of the best carvers in the world because I wanted to speed up my timeline. Now, is that a necessity? No, it's just that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to, here's just a little very simple carving that not even really a bird, just carved it out, painted it, and gave him his Christmas gifts. So all the way from that to, here's a mallard that I'm just finishing up. This is going to a person in Bend, Oregon. So anyway, that was my start, and it's a way for me to relax when I'm in my shop. I have a television here, I have ear pods on, and I'm listening to something that doesn't take a lot of concentration as I'm carving and painting. So that was where I began. I'm enthusiastic about it. I love what I'm doing. Unfortunately, other things don't get done. I should be probably doing around the house. I do take time to mow the lawn and that, but I'm sure that my wife would say she could use some additional help. But I love what I'm doing. Hopefully that answers your question, Larry.
Yeah, so I'm going to take the spotlight just for a second, just make a comment. Rick had said that you spend 40 hours a week about in the shop. And a lot of that is carving. You're probably cleaning a little bit, but you work at it a lot, right? It's almost not a job, but it's a full-time job. I asked Rick how many days, weeks, a month, a year does he spend in education, traveling to these classes? And you might have a different answer now, but about how much of your time per year do you spend learning from somebody else?
I would say it's
including videos and online and classes, those kind of things.
I'm gonna now, I can't prove this, but I'm gonna say at least a good solid 6 weeks and at least 8 hours a day traveling, watching videos, talking to other people, taking classes. And the thing about carving, it's like a lot of hobbies that we have. That's the thing that I love to do. But the other thing that's just as important is the people that I meet. Look at the people today all over the United States here. We're talking about something that we're passionate about and that we love. And I have friends now that I would never have met through this little world of carving that I didn't realize existed until 10 years ago when these people started opening up the doors. What wonderful people out there.
Yeah, so I'm going to switch gears. We'll show the video on this world of carving to kind of deal with the vocabulary because there are lots of different kinds. But the dedication for doing that amount of investment says you have a chance of being pretty good at it, right? Instead of 2 hours a week, kind of a thing. So let me.
While Larry's pulling that up, but don't be discouraged if you can only put 2 hours a week in or an hour. Do it.
Yeah. So this is a recorded segment called, I asked Rick in an interview of what does the world of bird carving look like? What's the vocabulary? What's the shape of it? And if Julie, I'm going to have you just look at me. If you can't hear the audio, just scream or just wave at me, would you? The sharing should happen and we should get going.
While we're at this, let's capture the world of bird carving, right? You approach this through the world of waterfowl. There are other forms of raptors and shorebirds and songbirds. And what is the world of bird carving? How do you describe that to somebody who doesn't know about the world?
Well, anything that flies is being carved, and the people who are competing at these different shows, at least the shows that I go to are competition shows where the people are competing, and there's everything from the smallest bird, the hummingbird, all the way up to the goose, swans. And so I think it's a world that once we open the door, we're surprised to see how many people are out there actually doing it. I was totally surprised how many people are actually carvers. And so when I go to these competitions, particularly the world's competition, we're going to see 1,000 birds there. Everything is just as you described, the shorebirds, the little birds, the raptors, the waterfowl. And it's just amazing to see the talent that these people have. And not all of them, in fact, probably percentage-wise, very few of them are professionals. You know, they're more like you and I, the person that starts in the shop that wants to do some quality work, but don't do it for a living.
Yeah. So decoys aren't realistic birds in the sense that they are a lot of detailed feathers. Do a lot of people get started with decoys and variations of those?
Well, let me share what my experience has been in that area. In the waterfowl carving, we have the very decorative birds that once you carve them, then we're burning in small lines, small little feathers. We have that in, all the way to this other end where we're doing a simple decoy where it looks like a duck and it's painted very simply.
So let's talk about the different types of waterfowl and working decoys and non-working. What is that vocabulary like?
Okay. In the world of competitive decoy carving, there are different levels or different degrees of the amount of work that you put into a carving for it to compete. For example, this is a very simple decoy made out of wood, obviously not painted, very simple, cedar. All right, so then when we take something like that and we paint it, we end up with something like this. This is a mallard drake, and I'd like to tip it. You can notice a very simple job. There's no texture. The primary feathers, tail feathers, are all painted on here. Nothing fancy. So this is a working decoy. And then we would put a keel on the bottom. I've taken this one off just simply to set it on the shelf. That's ready to hunt. That is what you call a working decoy. Now the next step up from a working decoy, these are all competitive categories when you go to a show, is what they call a decorative working decoy. Now the difference between that one and this one is the paint job, more sophisticated, more outline of the feathers, more detail on the bill. So working decoy, this is what they call a styled decoy. More detail. Very plain, more detail. The next step up would be what they call a smoothie. Now this is a decorative smoothie. Now notice the difference as we start moving here, starting to see some detail in the feathers. We're actually grinding down in some detail in the feathers. Each of these feathers is separated here. The primary feathers are stepped down and painted, but there's no burning on that. So this is what they call a smoothie. So we go hunting decoy, working decoy, stylized decoy. This is a smoothie decoy. And then the next one up, this is the foot that goes with that one. This is what we call a decorative decoy. Now if you were to get up close on this, you would see that the feathers here are burnt and they're textured. They're textured in, so every feather here has feather marks in it. And that includes here on the head, tail. So from the very simplistic to the advanced, or I shouldn't say advanced, I should say more detailed bird, because this bird here is just as beautiful as this one, just a different style in putting those two together. Okay, this bird here, this is what you call a decorative smoothie. There's nothing on here, everything is totally smooth, but you see just a little bit carved in the head, just a couple of little notches. This is a Pat Godden, who's a 16-time world champion, blue-winged teal. I've been fortunate enough to take about 8 weeks of classes from him over the years, almost every year for a week at a time. And so that's a decorative smoothie. So you can see the comparison of somebody who does this for a living, you know, and somebody that's does it for a hobby.
Well, let's also put another dimension on this, which is painting versus carving. So at some level, there's carving, there's wood burning, and there's painting. Maybe those are too simplistic, but as you go up the sophistication level, you're spending a lot more time on painting, are you, or not?
Painting is a skill just like carving. I find the painting is more difficult because of the subtleties that you can put into paint to make it look real. As you climb up the more competitive levels of carving, the skills, the anatomy that goes, the carver skills, the skills and knowledge that goes into the anatomy is at a different level than what most of us at a hobby are able to do. If you note here on all of these bills, well, 3 of them, all of them are to specifications.
A little bit about the heads and whether they're cast or modeled, or how'd you get them?
Okay, they have about 100 of these of different species. For example, a mallard, a scaup, a blue-winged teal, a canvasback, and a merganser. And when we're carving the bill on the head in competition, it needs to meet certain parameters. And so, for example, on this one here and this one here, you'll see a bunch of measurements on there, and I've taken my calipers and I've written measurements on there, so when I'm actually carving the bill, I'm carving to a certain width, a certain length, and a certain height. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, it's got to look natural, but there's nothing more natural than having a casting. So the question was, these type of bills here are found at taxidermy stores, and you can buy those. Some taxidermists, rather than using the real bill, replace them with this. For a carver, we use these bills for guidelines when we're carving. Now this bill right here, this is a casting that's actually taken out in the field. So when the bird was shot, it was actually dipped in a mold, and then they came and poured the mold. And you make several out of that mold until it starts, starting to fade some of the detail. These were very popular for a long time, but a lot more work. These can be mass produced.
You buy them?
So yes, I've bought them, I've traded for them, I've begged, borrowed. Probably haven't stolen any, but you know, we do anything to get these castings because it helps with all the measurements. Not so much on the working decoy, but everything else, it has to be within parameters.
Are they valuable and are they expensive?
They're about $14, $15 a piece. Yeah. And most taxidermy stores will have these resin ones. These ones here are not made anymore. They were very popular for many, many years.
Is there a typical starting point for bird carvers? I mean, do they start with decorative decoys, or do they start with a head only, or a feather only, or a foot only? I mean, how do you get started?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I think everybody's experience is a little bit different. If I had to start over again with the knowledge that I have now, what I would have done is I would have started with very simple birds like a working decoy until I got the look and the head down and what the bill looked like. This is what I would have done, and after I got good at that, I would move to the next more detailed one, the next one, the next one, and the next one. For me, I started with the most detailed, which carving, burning, and then trying to paint that. And the problem is especially when you're a beginner, if you make a wrong burn, a wrong carve, it's hard to fix it without putting putty in there, and that doesn't even guarantee to fix it. So my recommendation to a new carver, start simple. These are beautiful birds. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm proud of that bird, and that was one that I made early on. I've been very happy with that. And then work your way up, because you may find you don't have an interest in doing all that burning. And in fact, nowadays, most carvers, professional carvers that I've spoken to in waterfowl do not burn any longer. They become so effective with paint that they can make it look like it's burned, and you know, and they're easier to correct a mistake.
So how do people get started in a simpler bird form, perhaps than a working decoy?
Remember when we were kids, we used to just have a knife? All of us used to pack around knives just to play with. And so I think the best way to get started, there's something about a nice sharp knife. Now this one isn't as sharp as it could be. Something about a nice sharp knife, it just feels good. And so choose whatever it is that you would, you know, that you would like to do. Now this one, we could make a very simple bird out of this. And again, I'm not a great artist, but if we could do a simple bird, and let's see here. Now that's not perfectly drawn, but start carving that out. And there's something very satisfying with getting that bird down to where it is. Now, I would make that bird a little bit larger so I could start doing that. There's a bird, very simple that's from the top side, and then what we would do is we would draw, you know, something like that, and then we'd end up with a bird. The other thing is, this would make a very nice fish.
So let me put words in your mouth here.
Yes, please.
This is like a stylized bird. It doesn't have to be a realistic bird, right? So, or a stylized fish. So you could start approaching the objects in a sense of realism, but don't have to start there.
No. This is the thing. Carving is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be relaxing. So what is it that you would like to, do? Now there's a simple top view, not well drawn, but of a fish. So what is it you would like to carve? This year at the Flyway show, we had a gentleman that sat there all day and just carved. And he's going to be there next year for 3 days with a little chunk of wood like this. People are just going to come in and they're just going to pick away. So I think that's a good way to start interest is notice how easy it is to carve and to relax.
Do more people do songbirds than waterfowl, do you think?
You know, that's a good question. I think the same amount of skill goes into, if you're going to be a competitive songbird, same amount of skill goes into making a larger one. But again, why are we carving? Is it for relaxation, just for our own personal use, whatever it is?
Okay, we're going to pause here. And Rick just did a top-down version of that. And I will point out, Larry Roberts was one of the notable carvers, retired a couple of years ago. And in his retirement, he carved for 30 years professionally. On top of teaching shop in far northern California for 30 years. And he donated to our club a collection, his collection of heads of birds. We have casts. We probably have 75 casts in our tool library, waiting to get out to our membership who wants them to borrow them. So if you are in the mode of wanting to go down that path, you don't have to buy some. You can start checking some out probably. He also donated his entire collection of 250 books on mostly bird carving, but some mammal, nature carving. Nobody wanted it. The massive number of hardbacks. That's also in our collection that are available. So there's lots of ways to do that. Let's think about any questions on what Rick just talked about, or do you have any augmentation about his perception of the world of vocabulary on how to describe that? You can put it in chat, or you can shout it out. We're going to go into another segment on materials and painting as the next video segment.
I know we don't probably have time this evening, but it sure would be interesting to hear what everybody's interest is here, because I'm sure there's things that you can share with me that I would love to learn from you, just as well as there might be one or two things that I can do, you know, to share with you. So yeah, keep in contact with me by you know, email or whatever, and let's exchange some ideas. And if you can't think of the question tonight, give me a whistle later, and I'll do that. I want to help.
I'm especially interested in the tools you use for hogging out your work to get to the basic shape from the drawing that you just made. And then what tools do you use to finish and refine?
Okay, let's talk about a beginner. Okay, as you get more experience, then you want to draw your own patterns. But there are lots of books out there. I mean, this is a Tom Christie book here, but there's lots of books out there that have patterns in them. I'm just going to grab a couple here. Move my fish. So this is what I did when I got started. There are pattern books out there, and we'll talk about waterfowl, but this applies to mammals, to fish, to whatever. So you get a side view of a bird, and you get a top view of a bird. Okay, there's the side view and the top view. And then what we do is we're gonna, would you give me let's see. Excuse me, just 1 second here.
We'll do a 360-degree walk around his shop. You're looking at
I know this is coming here, but what we do then, we cut out that pattern, and it's very simple. On the top of this, now this one's not going to fit but I put that top view there like that, and I trace around the edge of it. I take the side view, there's a side view, and I line it up with the breast on the top view so that they're even. And then what I do is trace it on there, and then I go to my bandsaw and I cut it out. And what we end up with is something like this. So there's the top view. Now this is an antique decoy that I'll be making. There's a side view. And so now we're ready to start carving. And it's just as simple as that. Now, there are some basic, like center line, always keep a center line on your bird. So when you carve one side, you can look, make sure that they're balanced and such. But
So after that, it's basically hand tool work.
it can be hand tool or
Scott,
it can be
Jim,
power
Jim,
tool.
we'll go into that in a minute. So
Okay,
just,
thank you, Larry.
just hang on to that. Most of it's power carving. But I want to point out that the same basic process that he just described works for stylized comfort birds as well. It's just size and scale, right? And amount of detail. So that basic drawing top side views and bandsawing them out is kind of a common thing. Are there any other quick questions before we move on?
And who was that asked me that question?
That was Jim Sullivan.
Yeah, that was me.
Jim, if you would, if you want to communicate a little bit more on that, give me a telephone call, because these are patterns here, but say you found something on the website that you really like. If you just get I put that up on my television, say it's a goose or a duck, and I get a basic measurement, and then I'll trace it. That gives me my side view pattern.
Great.
So
Thanks, Rick.
And that applies with mammals, fish, whatever.
Yeah, the tricky part is you want to carve a bird, you want to carve a hummingbird or a sparrow or a cardinal or a blue jay or a hawk or a American eagle, whatever, right? It goes on. Let me switch gears. I'm going to continue on with the video. This next segment talks about materials, which is obviously going to go into some of the common woods, but also goes into cork. And then there's a segment on painting. I was humbled by painting. There's a fair amount of information there, but still not enough to satisfy everybody. But let me just continue on with this.
Yeah, please continue to use chat. If you don't get a chance to say them out loud, we'll answer all of them.
Yeah. So Scott Ryan, I'll just read it. So Scott Ryan said, I've been carving with Rick for a couple of weeks. I've done a lot of woodworking, mostly self-taught for very little. Well, you can read it. There's not a question here. So you can take a look at the chat. Here we go.
So Rick, what are the materials used to make these waterfowl?
Most of the materials used in the waterfowl carving world, and I would also say the bird and probably also the fish carving, are two main woods. One of them is tupelo, which is a kind of a swamp wood. It's the base, the bell part that grows in the swampy waters in North Carolina, Louisiana. It ends up drying. It's very light. There's not much grain to it. So tupelo is one. I'd say that's the number one. Two is basswood. Basswood is pretty popular. At least the basswood I purchased comes from the upper New York area versus North Carolina. White cedar is probably the third most popular. And the fourth most popular probably is cork. And this is compressed cork here, just like you see in a wine. You pop the cork, and these are very versatile. This green head here, this is a cork decoy, with the exception of the head. And this is a basswood head and a cork decoy. And why cork? It's light. It doesn't have to be hollowed. It can be hollowed. It's water resistant with the glue that's in there. It paints up well, and it's less expensive. A piece of wood for, we'll say, this mallard here, just for the body, probably would run, I'm going to say $30, where a piece of cork might run more like 10 or less. So
Where do you buy the cork?
the cork, there are probably different places to get it. We get it out of Michigan from a place called the Duck Blind, and he supplies most of the cork for the waterfowl carvers around the United States. If you're power carving, it scratches easily.
So you cut it with a saw to get it blocked down to where you want? Do you bandsaw the general shape?
Yes, so if this is our piece of wood here, I'll just draw the top shape of all I can get on here, and then I'll just bandsaw them out.
Yeah.
And then file or power carving. Knife doesn't work as well, you know, on cork.
And the heads are not cork. Their heads are wood, tupelo of some kind.
Yes, if you're going to use cork, what we want is some type of a wood head on there. And so basswood, tupelo, cedar. And the other thing a lot of times is they'll put a tail insert here of wood, because these are getting thrown around in the boat. They break off easily. So wood head, a wood tail insert, but the rest is cork. Advantages of using cork: one, it's less expensive, it floats very well, it's lighter. That's the three things.
So why not do the head?
Because that would be a disadvantage, is it's not as strong, so it's easy to throw these around and chip off stuff. Wood is a more solid material. So that's a good question. When we're getting ready to hollow out a bird, the reason is to make it lighter. And you think about the people going hunting, they're carrying all their decoys. You want to make it as light as possible. So I'm going to draw a line around here, and then I'm going to remove most of the wood that's in the middle. And this is just a Forstner bit. And I try to use about the same depth cut, so I'm looking over here to make sure that it's always about the same. The reason we hollow out a bird, we cut it in half, and the reason that we start hollowing it out is to make the wood lighter. When hunters going hunting, they want as light a decoys as they can to have to pack around. So we'll continue to drill these Forstner holes all the way around on the top portion and also the bottom portion. Then when that's done, I may clean it out just a little bit for looks, even though nobody sees that. And then the next step would be to use a two-part epoxy to glue it back together again, and then to complete my carving process. This is an example of a decoy that has been hollowed out. So this one here is made out of western red cedar. It was cut, split in half right here. Used the Forstner bit, completely hollowed out on the bottom and the top, glued back together, and then painted. The next step we go into is painting. This is an example of a bird that's been painted in the antique style. And I don't know if you can notice here or not, but all the crackling of the paint, you know, the worn look here on the breast. And painting is a whole nother skill, which I want to talk a little bit about. Let me talk a little bit about the process of finishing. And this would apply to a waterfowl or even a bird that you're going to put on the mantle. But here I have a piece of unfinished wood. And just like when you're painting a home, the wood needs to be primed. But the first thing we do with a waterfowl decoy is we seal it, because we want to keep the water out. Underneath the decoy here, I have some deft lacquer, satin lacquer finish. And so what I do is I thin that about 50-50 with lacquer thinner, and put that over the bird so that seeps in and seals all those cells. Actually, after that point, the bird probably really is waterproof. And I'll put, depending on where it's going, if it's actually going hunting, I'll put 3 or 4 coats of that sealer on until it actually gets a sheen before I actually start painting it. So the wood needs to be sealed. The next step is called a base coat, or I call it priming. And in the painting world, we use gesso to put over the top of that. Gesso is just a type of paint that gives it a little bit of grab so that the exterior paint will stay on top of that. And then the fun part comes, also probably the most difficult part, and that's adding the beautiful paint that makes that duck stand out to the rest of us. In the painting world, these are probably the most typical types of paint that a waterfowler uses. You're either an acrylic painter or you're an oil painter. Typically, they don't do too much crossing. The old days was oil. People that paint with oils love oils because of the blending, the slow drying, and the things that they're able to do with an oil paint that's much more difficult, maybe impossible to do with an acrylic paint. For me, I learned and was taught with the acrylic paints. These are typical types of paints that are found across the waterfowl carving community. The Traditions paint, which there's a history behind all these paints and how they came to be, but Traditions paints, Joe Sonia paint, this is a tube paint. Chroma is a thinner paint which is used for airbrushers, and then also a high standard paint is Golden. Golden is found pretty typical at any high-end art stores. The other ones need to be ordered. Your household paints or the craft paints that you use, I don't see any reason why they can't be used for things that you're going to be using in your home. If they're actually out in the weather and you're hunting with them, then I would stick with your higher end acrylic paints. So, how do we apply that paint? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about acrylic paints. And I think you need maybe 3 or 4 different types of brushes. Here's some different brushes there. Okay, this is a Klinsky Sable brush. This is not something that you need to have. This would be about a $40 brush. This is made out of the tail of an animal that's in Russia, and you want to take care of these brushes. You don't have to have these to do the paint job. It's just they're a higher quality brush, and once you learn how to use them, you'll get a much better finish. These type of brushes come in this shape. Also, this shape here. This is not a Klinsky brush. This is a number 4 brush, which indicates the size of the tip. And these run $5 or $6 a piece. Where you'll find it's worth spending the money for on brushes when you're doing fine work up on the head or doing in feathers, and you want that nice tip, it's worth it to spend a little bit more for a brush. But for general application, I think you're just fine with your regular inexpensive brushes. Some of you might recognize brushes like these. You might have seen those in the bathroom, the makeup brushes. I use these often when I'm blending 2 colors together. So I'll put, we'll just say a white and a black next to each other, and I want to blend them together, and I'll just use a stippling, and this makes a very soft where the 2 colors come together. These work very, very well. Have all kinds of those brushes. So paint can be applied by brush, which is probably fairly typical. Some professionals only use a brush. Some use a brush and what we call an airbrush. Airbrushes come in all different, well, I shouldn't say all different brands, and then there's different sizes where the paint goes in. For example, in this one here, the paint is in here. It won't hold very much, as opposed to, I'll put a couple of them up here. You can see how much paint that each of these hold. So I use an airbrush on some small things. Typically, I would say my decoys are painted probably 90% or more with a brush, and then an airbrush is used for some of the fine detail.
So Rick, it seems like you've got a songbird on your left-hand side that is simpler than the more complex birds. How do you get started with that? How many different colors and about how much time does it take to go through that?
Okay, the more you do, the quicker that it'll become to do these. I think that statement's kind of obvious, but this bird here basically has 4 different colors. Actually, 2 different colors, black and white, but different values. So what we've done here, the darkest is the beak, which is totally black, and the eyes, which are made out of a shotgun shell BB, and inserted in there and then painted black. And so a value of a color, if you take black and add a little white, you have a lighter gray. If you add a little more white, lighter, lighter, lighter. And so this is an example of a bird with really just 2 colors, black and white, with different values. And so this one has been airbrushed and some brushwork on it. So I airbrushed the whole thing in a white color, and then came back and used mixes, different values of the black and white, to paint the rest of it. And if you can see, there is some small amounts of brushwork. This is just for fun. There is no right or wrong how this bird looks, what color it is, and it's really pretty satisfying because it's a pretty good looking little bird when it's done.
So Rick, when you're done putting the color on, do you put a top coat on?
Usually I do. This is not necessary if it's going to be inside, but what happens when you have something stored in the house, there's usually dust on it, you have to dust them. So what I like to do is I use some type of a clear finish like this. This comes in satin, gloss, flat, dead flat, matte. And what I like to do is just spray a couple of light coats over that, so if it does have to be dusted, you're not going to impact the paint. Sometime when you're airbrushing, you're thinning your paint so much that you're losing the body of it, and so that paint can be removed with a little bit of water. So you put a little bit of finish coat on it, it'll make sure that that paint stays the way that it is. And keep in mind, even if you use flat or matte, you put multiple coats on, every coat is adding to the sheen. So you can make a matte, you know, turn more glossy by adding more coats to it if you would choose to.
So Rick, can you talk about applying different colors? And are there guidelines and books?
Yes, there are lots of quality books out there by very good artists. This is just simply one, Glenn McMurdo. If we open this one up, this is a green-winged teal, and as we open it up, he'll, in the back here, he talks about the colors that he uses. What I find is to use the base colors that he says, we'll just say a black and a white, or a raw sienna and a little burnt umber, but then mix it to what you think best fits that bird. And keep in mind that acrylic paints are different than oil paints in that acrylics dry darker. As you get more experienced, what I've found for me, it's much easier for me to look at a study skin of a bird and try to match that color than it is to use somebody else's guidelines. Because as we look at this color wheel, there's a lot of different ways to mix, we'll just say, some type of a brown color. So depending on what you're trying to achieve, a little bluish hue or a greenish hue in that brown color, it's easier for me to mix my own than try to copy somebody else's. But having that guideline there says, okay, you know, there's a couple of colors I need to keep in mind when I'm mixing is very helpful for me.
Do you find yourself being more stressed as you get into the finishing side, or is it a more relaxing side of the process?
In painting or carving, I found that it actually is relaxing. Now when I begin, or we have a novice that's still learning, it can be very, very frustrating, and it's helpful to have a mentor, whether it's online and doing a FaceTime or some way that they can look at that and make a suggestion, than to do it alone. So at the beginning, very frustrating, but as you go along, it becomes less and less stressful. I find carving and painting very relaxing.
And you have a lot of paints in your kit right here, so you have the full range of options available to you. Is that right?
Yeah, I have a lot of paints, and that's because I thought that I needed a lot of paints. But the reality is, you could probably get by, I could probably come up with 10 colors. You don't need all this stuff.
When you're ready.
Okay, that was a pause point for this section. When we started with comfort birds, Frank Faust was the creator of that idea about 40 years ago. Wood Carving Illustrated wrote it up 10 years later, and it's got legs all over the place. The story that his son told about Frank's adventures, he was a bird carver. He would carve decoys, full-size decoys, and paint them. And then he realized as he get into it that it was a lot of work. So he started carving half-size decoys. And then he discovered that painting was not so much as enjoyable for him. So he started clear coating them, and he left them around his house, and people would come over and pet them. And that became the genesis of comfort birds, that he then made them smaller from half size to quarter size to eighth size, and then clear coated them, and that became sort of the genesis. But his venture started that way. Randy is the president of Feather and Quill, and when I first met Randy, he was teaching feather carving at a 2-hour show and tell at one of our club meetings. And when I think about doing sculpture, I like to learn how to do a nose, and then an ear, and then a mouth, and maybe the eyebrow, and then put it all together. So the idea of starting with a feather as a simple example is, to me, another way of thinking about getting started, that you can do that and paint it. And if you come to Coastal Carvers, Randy probably will be there again, because he almost always is there and has feathers that he sells, and he was selling them at Real Mother Goose, as I recall, for $40, $50, and they became hat pins and other kind of things. Very nicely done and exquisitely detailed. And so that becomes another thing. So time for questions, as we have a pause point for anything. Judy, you want to unmute yourself, and then I can't unmute you, Judy. So in the lower left hand of your screen,
There we go. Is that it?
Yep, you're done. Go ahead.
Okay. Rick, when you're using your airbrush and your paints and you're thinning it down, do you add any additives to it, like a flow medium or anything like that?
I do. I'm going to share this is what I mix my paints in, these little cups.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get the little, because then I always try to make up more than you use, but
Yeah.
I use water, but in my paints, say this one here, what I do is I put the flow medium in here,
Oh,
and then I shake it up, and then if I need to thin it, I put it in one of these little cups and I add a little bit of water to it. There's different theories on the water that it takes away, but I know the flow medium, at least what I've been taught, is I think it keeps the consistency of the paint or whatever the pigment isn't. And so then I add water to it. That's how I do it. Right or wrong, I don't know.
okay. Thanks.
Judy was our featured carver at our first carving presence at the gathering of the guilds, and had just exquisite birds and mammals there. And you'll be at the Lincoln City show, Judy, as I recall. I first met Judy when she was the featured carver there about 5 or so years ago, as I recall.
May I just add that Judy is a wonderful carver and painter, probably one of the best that there is. She won't tell you that, but I'll tell you that she's good. And thank you for asking me that question. That made me feel good that somebody of your quality is asking me a question. Thank you.
What Judy doesn't know is we're going to try to ask her to have an interview so we can do some videos and conversation with her, because there are a lot of people like Judy around that are just walking gold mines of experience and knowledge. It's really pretty staggering. Okay, there's nothing in the chat, so I'm going to move on. The next section is a shop tour. So you get to see Rick's abode, and you might describe the building context as separate from your house, Rick, just so kind of people can do it, but let me get back to the video.
While he's getting ready for the video, when I was still working, we decided to build a shop, and I think it's 30 by 60, something like that, and didn't know what we were going to be doing with it, but I knew that I loved to woodwork. And so I walled off 2 sections of it and made that my shop. And so as we do the tour, you'll see here, but the other parts for boat storage and other things.
Okay, here we go.
So, Rick, can we take a look at your shop?
Yeah,
You
please.
got a lot of
I'd
things
love
here.
to share what I've got here. We have a lot of different things here, and what I would say that really none of this is absolutely needed, but it sure is nice, and I'll tell you a little bit why. Up on the top shelf here, I have a variety of different mounted birds. I have these all around the shop here, but the reason that I keep these here, they're great reference for painting. There's nothing more real than having a real bird in front of you to trying to match that paint and trying to get the shadow here. So there's a variety of birds that are up there. How did I come across all these? Since I'm not a hunter, I have traded decoys for them. I purchased some of them. We've had a taxidermy person that has actually shot them, and they've filled them up. So all kinds of birds. Pretty well have everything that I need that's represented, you know, in the North Oregon coast. The one thing I don't have is a canvasback, and I expect to have one this winter. In fact, the person was talking to me this weekend. So those are mostly almost 100% used for painting purposes, other than that, because we already have the bills in a casting. Now, these here, this is a cast, this is a cast, and this is a cast. These are each done by different artists. This is a Pat Godden casting. This is a canvas back here. And so I use that, number one, I can take the measurements off of this because he's used the proper measurements to do where the bill comes into the head. This is a plastic casting here. This is a Brunet casting here of a canvasback drake, and these are a couple of pieces of artwork from Dale Herbert, who was a world champion. He does shorebirds, and this one here is Peter Kahn, which comes to our show. This is a pintail hen that's one of mine. And then I just wanted to kind of point this out here. I don't know if you can see it, but I do have a lot of birds. We were talking earlier about small things that we can carve. So this is a cutout of a small type of a duck that I could very easily take my knife, whittle that down, you know, for sitting watching a ball game or outside at a family activity. So have some of those there. This one here is ready to be painted. He's just a cute little, probably, I'm not sure what it is, probably a pintail. So one of the things that I found very useful in my shop are these magnets here. I get these at Harbor Freight. They're about $4. Get them on sale for $3. But I put them up, and then I can have all my bits there. They're easily seen. I can put them back in order. Obviously, a lot of these are not in order, but I really like those metal strips. For me in my shop, this is an inexpensive belt sander, but I do use it often, particularly after I'm done painting. I like to sand the bottoms of them and, you know, sign them, and I like that clear wood versus a painted on. That, you know, that's just my particular option. And of course, we need to have some type of a drill press. Over here, just continued, just more birds. When I start carving, if I'm doing whatever kind of a bird that I'm doing, I like to start with a head, and I'll do 3 to 5 heads. And then I'll choose which one that I like that fits best the bird. That's why you see so many heads here. So this is a mallard, got a pintail, canvasback, mallard, and these are just some more that I haven't finished up yet. This is a casting that I purchased just to paint. I went to a painting class, I think that was Glenn McMurdo's class, and we painted that. Tom Mattis bird, Brunet bird. And let's continue to go. Okay, so as I'd mentioned, I like to carve heads. The more times you do something correctly, the better you will get at it. It's not practice makes perfect. It's practice of perfection that makes perfect. And so, for example here, what you'll see is I also use these for teaching. If you can, I don't know if you can see, but there's measurements all across here. Those measurements have been taken from a study bill, placed onto there, the width, and then you can see the eye channel on the other side. I have measurements. And then, sorry about that, I start carving it. So I'll carve one side as a teaching. I draw the measurements on this side, and then on this side I carve it. So when I'm working with somebody that's learning how to do heads, I can show them how to do the measurements and then actually how to do the carving. So you'll see this on all of these. These are all halfway done, partially done, and the reason that they're partially done is, again, for reference. And again, lots of heads. I like to experiment, with different types of, this would be a merganser, a hooded merganser, using paintbrush, tips cut off, and then I've tried to paint them and smooth them in. Now this is on the bill, but again, just shows the example there. So lots of heads. I love to do heads. The head will carry a body, and I'm assuming that would be true on any type of a carving. A good head will help carry a body if it's not quite accurate. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about bases that we put our birds on, or our carvings, whatever they are. And I found that I've been to the beach and picked up different pieces of wood and rocks, and they work really well. But here's what I found here. These are styrofoam castings, very light. Now that's a piece of wood, and if I want, I can cut it in half and carve it if I don't want one that large there, and then I paint it. So they're already handmade. They're $5 or $6 a piece, but this is a piece of wood. I have rocks up there. There's a rock that I painted with coral on it. So very handy to have around, and not too expensive, and definitely, in my opinion, worth a few dollars to purchase those. The wood supply, earlier previously we'd talked about tupelo, basswood, and cedar. All of this wood right here is tupelo pieces. There's some fairly large pieces down here. This over here, this is western red cedar. This is all old growth cedar. One of the cautions that I would give about cedar is it's very allergic, and you should use some type of a mask and air filtration system. So we're talking about reference. I've been told you can never have too much reference material. And these were real birds that were taxidermied. And you notice there's one wing out on several of these. And the reason for that is, again, for painting purposes here, trying to get these nice speculum colors, to look at how the feathers lay over the top of the wing. That's the purpose of those. I don't use them so much for carving, but I do use them for painting, and I do use them to lay out the feathers in a little bit different way.
So Rick, those cabinets, is that all carving related?
Well, you can never have too much storage space, and this is what I use my cabinets for. And the answer is yes, it's all carving stuff. So, for example, here I have all kinds of reference books. I have notes that I've taken from a variety of classes. And then on this side here, I have a bunch of manila envelopes. And so, for example, this is a canvasback head. Here's a Harlequin Drake. So if I were to open up this, what you're going to find in there is the pattern that I previously used. I usually put some paint color swatches in there so I can match my paint again. They're in alphabetical order here.
So Rick,
Okay, that's another another pause point. What you didn't see is Rick continues to walk. There's a sizable bandsaw on the other side, and you saw some of the other shop accessories, kind of with a whole wall of things. It's quite an amazing place. For me, what was interesting is what we're going to look at next, which is Rick does almost all of his work in a section that I would say is about 8 feet wide by about 3 feet deep. And we'll look at that in a sense of power carving. Where he's sitting now is looking at a laptop, which is right near where his power carving thing is.
While you're going to that next piece there, I know a couple of people had to run, but one of the things that I heard was, I do furniture making. I don't do this, but everything I'm guaranteed there's something that I do that will help a furniture maker, a character carver, or whatever. And I absolutely know whatever you're doing is something that I can use to make my stuff better. So, please share those ideas. I think one thing we have in common, is a passion about carving and woodwork, right?
And let me just acknowledge Bob Cheverini, who is here too, is a friend of ours. Mine has done quite a bit of bird carving, participated in various shows over the time. It's quite an amazing body of work. And I don't know everybody here, so I can't acknowledge everybody. But I do want to say that we're going to look into power carving next, which is about an 18-minute segment. And I would call it, this is a crash course in power carving. And after that's done, we'll into more Q&A, and then I'm going to spend a little bit of time, not much, maybe 5 or 10 minutes talking about this Frank Russell set of DVDs that are now online that are in fact quite fascinating for a power carving vehicle. In the end, where I'm going personally is trying to find ways to make this practical in baby steps for some of us who need to take baby steps. And Rick has indirectly offered that he might help us put together a short workshop that in a day we could both power carve and paint one of his stylized birds. And so you could experience the whole cycle in a compressed time, so you don't have to go through being a ornithologist, a bird specialist for some of these things. Okay, so let's go on to the next section. During this section, some of the power equipment will be running while Rick is talking. It may not be quite distinct, so you might have some questions, but we can deal with that.
let's talk about the world of power carving.
Yeah, most of the work takes place here. Of course, it begins with a pattern, drawing out the pattern, then getting out a rough out on the bandsaw. Sometime after that, we're going to hollow out the inside of the bird. And then the next thing that I do on the bandsaw is I try to do as much wood removal prior to getting here as I possibly can. So I turn the bandsaw on about a 33-degree angle. I draw an inch all the way around the top, and then I trim off some of this because this is dust here, and if I can remove more wood over there, I would like to do that. So let's talk a little bit about power carving, some of the things that we have available. First of all, we should recognize that safety is number one. I don't follow all the rules necessarily all the time that I'm going to share with you. That's up to individual choice, but if you want healthy lungs and healthy eyes and all your fingers, we should take each of these into consideration. So I have an exhaust or a dust removal air filtration system. This is called a Tornado 3000, and it'll really move the air. The filters can be a little expensive, and so what I do is I like to run a pre-filter. These are just this is a Costco filter. I run it over the top of it, so when I have to, this will fill up with dust. What I'll do is take my vacuum and I'll vacuum it off in here. Depending on how much dust that I'm creating, I also may run this laptop here. I'll hook up my vacuum to here, so I'm sucking dust out this way, and then also up above here I have a dust filtration system up on the ceiling. Again, trying to protect those lungs. Now, personal protection, I almost always wear some type of a mask. This is an N90 mask. I find that it works well for most of what I do, and I wear this, and then I also wear safety glasses. I do not use this one, but I wanted to share my carving partner use this one. This is a whole head air filtration system. So in addition to the other things we've already talked about, you put this one on, it seals around your head, and then it's battery operated, and it helps keep that air nice and clean. Again, some woods are more toxic than others. Western red cedar is one of those, and I would suggest definitely wearing some type of filtration system when you're working with them. The tools that I use for power carving are, I have a couple of Fordhams here, and this is the end of the Fordham here, and if I can point you to these bits here, these are the carving bits that I use most often. Probably if I had to choose two, those two right there, some type of a cylinder one and some type of a triangle one, I could get by with those. This one is a rounded nose, which there are applications that are nice for that. This one has no grinding at the end. It's a safe end, so when you're grinding, it won't grind at the end, as opposed to this one that has the grind on it, you know, or this one here. That's the major tools that I use. I have purchased all kinds of tools, but I surely don't use all of them. You know, there are applications for those, but these are the major ones. You know, these two or three right here are the major ones.
Do you clean them?
So when there's a couple of ways to clean those, they need to be cleaned. And I left these on purpose here. See how they're full of sawdust. There's a couple of ways we can do that. One is you go down to your local lumber store, and this is like our old tennis shoes used to be. In fact, tennis shoe will probably work, but you just put that bit right up against that and turn it, and it'll clean it off. Now, sometimes you'll get glue in there because you've glued two pieces together and it's stuck in there. The other way you can do this is you take your little propane torch, get something that can hold that, and take your torch and burn those. Just get it red hot. It's not supposed to hurt them, and that'll clean all that out there and get it just like new, except they won't have that color on it. These particular bits come in different grits depending on you know, what you want. That one's a very coarse, this green one here is a very coarse bit, and this yellow is more of a fine grit. So again, depending on what you do. But we'll take this piece of wood here, and we're going to try to get it to a round, and so we're going to use a pretty aggressive type of bit to do that. Now, just a couple of bits of caution. These things really hog off the wood very well, but they also take your skin off. And I have to say that I've had quite a few of those over the years. I'm smarter now and more experienced, but you need to be careful with grinding, and you can read or watch videos about what is safe. What you'll end up doing is you'll take those tips and try them, and always have some type of a whatever you call
Pivot point.
a pivot point. Always some type of a pivot point so it doesn't come and get you. If you're just carving like this, you're apt to get your finger. So some type of a pivot point, whether it's with a Fordham or a Dremel or whatever it is. These are dangerous pieces of tools if they're not used correctly. So the saw does a good portion of the wood removal. The Fordham does the next big piece. And then we get into finer wood removal. This happens to be an NSK. This is an expensive Dremel. A Dremel will work. It doesn't have the same size convenience as one of these. It may not be as powerful. This particular one here goes anywhere from 1 to 40,000 RPM. So it is fast. Wearing eye protection is imperative. Something flies off one of these tips, you lose an eye, it's not worth it. So always wear eye protection. There are other types of machines out there. I mentioned the Dremel. I know that Fordham also has one. There's small battery operated one. So if you're just beginning, I would say find somebody like me, come over and try it, or buy an inexpensive one.
Yeah, I will also mention, most of our members know this, but some don't. We have a tool library, and we've had donations of various kinds of equipment, power and hand tools, that are available for people to try. So we do have a donated Evolution NSK. We have several other micromotor versions. We have several Fordham class rotary tools. And the purpose of people giving them to us is so they could try them, so they could be better buyers, so they can buy the tool that they're confident that they will use and the brand that they want to use.
Also, for the beginning carver, there's no need to buy 1,000 different bits. I'm stretching a little bit, but I literally have purchased probably over 100 bits for this NSK. And when it really boils down to, you use just a few. I have some here. There's about 6 of them there. They're just really the same thing, maybe a just different grit. And then these white ones here. And for the most part, other than fine detail, that's it. So I'm thinking maybe 2 big ones for the Fordham, 2 or 3 for the small one, and you've got them. Now, you could ask your dentist. I actually have a lot of dental drills here, but what I found is they work, they're strong, but I just don't use them that much. So save your money, talk to other carvers, ask them what they use, what they would suggest, and go from there, and then try them.
And there's a world of sanding attachments as well as grinding the burrs and bits and cutters, right?
Yeah, that's excellent. I do not really like to hand sand, and these have actually been a lifesaver. Now this one is for your Fordham. There's different grits all the way down to a 30, 40 grit. I've actually had people tell me that just with these, they can carve a whole bird. Now I'm talking about a duck, because you start at that 40, 50 grit and work all the way up to, say, 220. And so these are a lifesaver. They do a great job. And then these smaller ones, they'll fit into a Dremel, or in this case, an NSK. And you run these about 10,000 RPMs versus where you're running one of these 40 or 50,000 RPMs. So yeah, they're a great a great tool. I would definitely recommend some type of a sander, power sanding, to speed the process up, and they do a great job.
What's your feelings on gloves?
I do not like gloves, and the reason is, I suppose it depends on the type of glove. If you're going to use gloves, you have to use something that has no little strings out of it. I've had carvers in my shop use this, and it catches the little strings, and they're dangerous. So I prefer not to use gloves. I know people use finger protectors or just protectors. Once you've carved yourself 2 or 3 times, you realize that doesn't feel that good, and you try to stay away from that. So I don't like gloves. I can feel the wind if it's getting too close to me. So that's my preference.
You wear of apron of any kind? Any?
I have been wearing different types of bibs. Want to ask again?
So what about aprons? You wear them?
Yes, I do. Pretty much everything that I do, I have some type of an apron on. I do like to have a painting apron separate from my carving apron. This is just a Walmart $5 or $6 apron, some nice Levi ones. But what I've found is, especially when I'm power carving, I get dust all over, and what's happening is the bottom of my pants are always getting dirty, and I'm getting dust down in here. And so recently, I went to this doctor's apron, and I've found this has been the best one for me because, first of all, it snaps together easily, but I put a little piece of tape there. I don't get the dust down here. It covers pretty much my pants down here where the apron's always falling off. So I've moved to this, and right now, after 10 plus years, this is my favorite because it keeps me the cleanest.
If you have someone that's never power carved before, and you're letting them use your systems for the first time, what would you make them wear or do?
Okay, well, I'll give you an example of my 8-year-old grandson. And so he has to wear safety glasses, not just my regular glasses, and he has to wear a mask. And then he also has to wear a cover here. So if he was to come in here today and I asked him, okay, let's get to carving, he would do all 3 of those things. I'd explain to them how they work, make sure we always have some type of a pivot point, either with our thumb or our pinky when we're carving, and start slower. You can speed up. Speed can actually make carving easier because if it's too slow, it'll grab.
So Rick, could you do a simple demonstration of the safe way to get started power carving?
Yeah, let's do this. So on the Fordham, you can either have a handheld over here that you can purchase, or in my case, I have a foot one here that controls my... So I want to talk, just briefly show you how I do this, and as you learn from other people, there may be things that I can improve upon, so don't take my word as that's the only way. I don't think there's only one way, but there's a safe way, so make sure that we're doing that. So we're going to take a little bit of wood off of this cedar decoy here. Well, the first thing I want to do, make sure I get my glasses on, get my mask on, and I forgot to mention previously, this. So we want to make sure we get a good, safe pivot point, and I'll demonstrate the right way and the wrong way. So here, I'm using my thumb as a pivot point to pull towards. Now you see when I start getting close, I'm lifting up and stopping. Now without using a pivot point, I don't have that same control. It bounces. So always use a pivot point.
Rick, why don't you just repeat about the pivot point?
Okay.
That with and without it, you have control and bouncing without it.
So when we're carving, the purpose of the pivot point is for stability. So when I'm pulling here, I'm pulling towards my thumb. And also notice I can't get my thumb ground because it's hitting right here. Now, without a pivot point, I'm just holding the bird here and I'm carving like this. It's jumping and I don't have control over it. So that pivot point is kind of like a stop. It's a safety gap and you won't get your thumb caught in there. We notice, if you can see here, see we're getting some grain here. So what's happening here is we have some softwood and hardwood. The grain is actually the hardwood. The growth ring in between is softwood. So we want to make sure that we're writing on top of the grain. The question is, do I ever lose control, with the bit? And the answer is yes, sometimes, because I forget to use my pivot or I get into a little bit softer piece of wood, and I immediately know that because this thing starts chattering or jumping and I know that I've done something wrong. So I immediately let up on the power and, get it to stop.
And that is the abrupt end. We shot about 3.5 hours worth of video.
East
And,
of Astoria with Rick Pass
hang on a minute.
in his shop. And we're doing a series of chats and interviews of top.
Sorry, I got the background thing going on. Okay. So there's a lot more video. Roger did a yeoman's job of kind of condensing this down. We packed a lot into it, but there's more, obviously. Are there any questions? Let me look at the chat here. One of them was from Jim Spister. He said, so far, nothing about gouges or knives. One of my favorite things about carving is being able to listen to a jazz radio station without headphones. Guess this power carving severely limits my productivity. I mean, hand carving does. I guess he was just making a point of that. He said, I've seen some small rechargeable pen-shaped carvers. Is there any experience or opinions on these for fine details? Rick, do you have any experience with little battery?
Well, I'm not sure, not exactly sure what we're talking about, but anything that's, as long as they can get a bit in and you start doing something that's small, like those, real small decoys or a bird like this, I mean, I think it's, it works. Anything that will remove wood will work. You probably get a woodpecker. If you could train a woodpecker, he could try to carve you a nice bird too. But I don't really know. You've kind of seen the equipment that I use, but wood removal is wood removal regardless. And there's 1,000 ways or there's many ways to take wood off.
Yeah. Are there any questions anybody would like to shout out?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, do you have experience with the cuts-all bits? And what do you think of those, like the flame shape? There's several different levels of aggressiveness on those coarseness. Or fine.
The question is, do you have any experience with the Cutsall brand of bits?
Actually, I think, and I could be mistaken here. I'm just pulling up my the bits here, but some of these bits I don't think they make anymore. And the last one I used, you can't really tell, but this is a Cutsall bit, and this was I think it was a medium grit, and also now here's one here, that's very aggressive. But I like them. At first, I was a little scared because I mean that gets your finger or something, it's going to take the skin off pretty quick. But I believe these two are Cutsall Brits, and I'm very satisfied with them. And I ordered both of these off of Amazon, which means for me, rather than going to a wood carving store, which there are none in the Astoria area, I can get them quickly, basically a day away, and they're less expensive. I recall buying some of these bits here, and gosh, I think they were, maybe almost $30 many years ago. And so I go to Amazon, and I'm happy with the cut style. In fact, the next bits that I order, they're going to continue to be that brand. And I don't know, I think I always buy the medium grit. This is a fine grit here. This isn't a cut saw, but I think fine grit can take a lot of wood off. So I don't know which one I would recommend, but I use the medium and the fine more so than, the aggressive cut saw one like this. Does that help or not?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so Cutsaw, in my experience, is a brand carried by Woodcraft. They have a lot of them, both in eighth inch shank and quarter-inch shank. Woodcrafters downtown carries, I think they're Typhoon branded Fordham equivalent versions. The other variation of these bits and burrs is whether you use cutters or the burrs, and then we can maybe save that. But I want to show a couple segments from this video by this guy named Frank Russell. Frank Russell was hired apparently by Fordham to produce 3 DVDs in a set that are no longer available to buy as DVDs, but they're available for free online. And it's called Fur, Feathers, and Fins. So fur would be a mammal, a bunny. Feathers would be a bird, and fins would be a fish. And these 3 DVDs cover 3 projects for doing one of each, for carving them. And in the background, he has orientation material for Fordham, because it's produced by Fordham. But the lessons are generic. And let me just quickly show you a very short segment on the on this. So I skipped this in the handout that comes in the email that comes out. I will reference each of these, give you links for them, and give you starting and stopping times. This is the section on dust collection and eye protection.
Some way to contain and get rid of dust. This I built into the tabletop. Let me move this slightly. And this is nothing more than a motor pan that you can get at any store that supplies dust collectors and accessories. And rather than have a blast gate, which usually goes underneath, I wanted something that was simple, so I have a racket ball to stop the air. And you'll see how this functions later on. Because I'm getting older, because my eyes are getting weaker, I have to get more power to see with, and I use these optivisors. Now, what you want to do is select an optivisor that will allow you to work magnified at a comfortable position as you normally carve. Now you can tell what the magnification is on each lens of these. There's the lens, and then there's a headpiece. In the upper left hand corner is a small number that tells you what the magnification is. I have gone from a 3 to now this is a 4, and when I do competition work, I sometimes, for the finer detail, I use a number 7. But this, if you have eyes that are weak or failing, try these. Now, safety. We have to discuss not only the dust collector, but eye protection. This is, if these glasses that I have are safety glasses, but if you don't wear glasses, or even if you do wear glasses and they're not safety glasses, get a pair of safety glasses with a holding cord that you can take them off periodically and hang them down when you're doing other work. Now, even though we have a dust collector here, we also want to consider the use of a dust mask. This is a particulate mask, and the reason you want this is you can see the dust going through this dust collector, but that's not the dust you want to fear. The fearful dust is what you can't see, that's air-laden dust. Along with sight, you want a light that you can direct, that's a strong light, and we'll get more and more into the use of this particular light at a later time when we're texturing hair, or fur rather, or when we're texturing feathers, or when we're texturing scales on the fish. This is of utmost importance. Plus, if you can illuminate, the more illumination for an area, the better, as far as my old eyes are concerned.
He's repeating some obvious stuff, but I wanted to point out that version of the dust collector, which is what Rick had kind of pulled out from his desk. One of our local carvers was a woman named Janet Clemens, and she was carved for 30 years, passed away, and her estate donated a bunch of stuff to our club, and we'll sell some of it, one of which was at the time, a commercial system that had a fan motor from a furnace. That's 600 cubic feet per minute. It's a quite powerful fan, but the nice thing about it, it was fairly quiet. And it had a 6-inch hose that came into a lap board that sat between her knees, her legs, and rested on her knees, and it sucked the dust there, and it collected it into a bag. And I don't know what the filtration was on the bag. I don't think it was going to be the submicron level, but it was yet another variation of this kind of a system. I'll put out another reference for one of our carvers, Karen Kettler, who is our primary carver on the comfort birds, looked at the Tornado alternatives because it's a well-known brand, but also fairly expensive. So she found some other alternatives there. I remember when we first met Bob Cheverini, the first thing he talked about was dust collection as well. And I'm saying all this because I feel guilty for not spending enough time wearing masks and thinking about dust collection, opening my window or opening a garage door to let the atmosphere be a ventilation system. Let me play one more section on this burrs and bits thing. When Larry Roberts, the bird carver, retired and donated the books, he donated also, he said, would you like these? He had a tower full of all of his bits and burrs and cutters and sanders, organized by quarter inch, 1/8 inch, and 3/32. Plus he had sanders. He had 250 devices. And we collected all those. Right now, John Carver's experimenting, John Wheeler has got those and experimenting with them. But we have other collections of these things around. So my suggestion is think about tool library that we have accessible to you. Try these things out so you're buying the right things. Frank Russell will talk about the flame profile, which is kind of reinforcing what Rick had. Let me just go back to this.
While he's grabbing that, one of the first air filtrations I bought was from Harbor Freight, and I put it on the other side of the wall and ran a pipe to it because it was so noisy. But there's lots of different ways to do it. This depends on how much noise you can put up with and how good the filtration system is.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk with you now about the bits that we use for wood carving. The selection you see in front of you will allow you to carve any carving that you can hold in your hands. Bits are described by 3 different methods: by shape, by size of shank, and by grit or material that that's used to grind with or cut with. Let me first go over the shapes. This is a flame shape. This is a tapered. This is a ball or sphere. This is a round nose, or some folks call it a bull nose, and this is a cylinder. The cylinders come in with grit on the tip rather, or without. And when it comes without, that's called a smooth end bit. They are available in 1/4 inch, in 1/8 inch, and 3/32 inch. Now, those are the 3 sizes that we use primarily in wood carving. This particular collection is what each of my students, when they came to my school, would find in front of them to use for the week seminars that we did. So let's get into these. The more aggressive ones in the back, the 1/4 inch Typhoons, the red are the most aggressive, whereas the blue are a little less aggressive, coarse and fine. Then there's the 1/8 inch, and as you're roughing out the work to begin with, to waste away, you'll be using the 1/4 inch, because these are the ones that introduce the power, that allow you to remove the most all at once, because there's more surface to grind away because of their size. Then as you begin to reduce the size and begin to introduce detail within the carving, we'll go to the 1/8 shapes, or 1/8 shafted.
Okay, I'm going to stop there and leave it as a teaser. And when you get the email, you'll be able to find this on a website. Go watch that segment. He also has, there's about, because this was done by Fordham, it's very heavily Fordham oriented, but these things work for micromotor based systems, whether it's NSK or some other brand. It works for Dremel, and it'll work for the Fordham. And the techniques of safety and pivot points, he just reinforces. And anyway, when Jerry Boone tackled this project, we tried to find Frank Russell to be the speaker for a program like this or some expanded version of it. We can't find him. The DVDs were done in 2007, so that's a fair amount of time ago. We knew where he lived. He was living in Maine. He had a sizable piece of property and a school. We traced him down to Florida, and we tried to track through his kids. We tried to track him through Fordham. We've not been able to find him. If anybody knows him, let me know. We'd like to do more in the world of power carving. And if you know other video or DVD resources online or YouTube, let me know. We'd like to put a collection of this together. For those of you that are in the Guild of Oregon Woodworkers, Carol Boyd is putting together an orientation workshop at the end of February in the Guild bench room to deal with some of the rotary tools. And Rick Martin is one of the guys in that club, and Rick is a shop attendant in our local vocabulary. And he was at a class that we were doing, assisting, and he said, you know, Larry, I've been carving for 50 years, but I've never carved wood. That caught my attention. I said, what do you carve? He said, I carve wax. He's a metal worker. He's a jeweler. And so he did all of his work in wax. And we're going to do a program on wax carving. He used the Fordham. He used very hard, very durable material for the waxing stuff that he did to get the details. But whether it's wax or stone or gourds, you name it, there are a lot of other materials. For me, the one that I came away with meeting Rick was I never thought about cork. I just never thought about cork. And if you're going to paint it, why not, right? It may just be an alternative that is, for a lot of reasons, solves that. Thanks, right? Charles Sapp is joining us from St. Louis. He said, old computer fans mounted in a box with a filter is a fairly inexpensive way to collect dust. And Charles, I didn't see you on the screen, so I apologize for that. Charles is the incoming president of the National Woodcarvers Association, the organization that produces Chip Chats. So welcome to that role, Charles, and thank you for doing that job. It's a big job, and it's a very important organization. I encourage you to join and subscribe to Chip Chats. It's been a major force in our area. We're out of time. I'm not out of time, but you know, the clock is out of time. But is there any final questions or comments that anybody would have for the benefit of the group or for asking Rick a question? Okay, well, let me just put a plug in for likely next month. Nora Hall, can you hold your hand up if you've ever heard of Nora Hall? A few people. Most people don't know her. She's one of the most important carvers in the world. Passed away in 2011. She lived 11 years in Oregon. She was a master carver, learned carving during World War II, apprenticed to her dad in Amsterdam, and eventually immigrated to the United States, lived in California, did architectural carving, classical carving, lived on the coast. She taught around the area. I never had a chance to meet her. She and her son produced VHS versions of classical carving, which are still available today. And we'll do more promotion of this, but norahall.com is a website that her daughter Renee is running. What we'll show in the program are two videos that have never been seen. Gary Rogowski, who is well known locally, aspired at one point about 20 years ago to do a West Coast version of Roy Underhill's program that's been going on forever on PBS. And he did a pilot program, and he did it around Nora Hall. So he traveled out to Cloverdale, which is on the coast, Pacific City area, and interviewed her and did some carving, and then he did some more stuff back at his shop. So we'll show that video, and we'll show a shorter version that was done by a professional company. And these have never been seen. I corresponded with Renee, the daughter, a couple years ago, and she shared these, and we got permission from Rogowski to put the one up on our website and make it publicly available. She's written a book. We have study casts that have been donated from her, and she's had a major role in teaching, I think, a lot of people some of the basics that we take for granted today. We're also putting a program together probably around the Albany carousel. It may be the Salem, but right now we're focusing on Albany, who did a community carved carousel project for over 20 years before they carved enough animals to make that thing work. And built what, a $4 or $5 million building, created a separate nonprofit to operate it. And the world of carousel carving is obviously major scale. You know, it's stylized animals as opposed to realistic, but they have to be durable, they're big, and they take up to 5 years to complete. And a piece of that is that some people fall in love with birds, some people fall in love with foxes or owls or whatever, but some people fall in love with ostriches and lions and other things. The Jantzen Beach carousel locally here was shut down, I think, in 2012 when Jantzen Beach did a remodel. All of that 100-year-old carousel was put in storage and mothballed, and it's coming back to life, and it's being put back to life in the Dalles. And their goal is to have it re-operational in the Dalles at, I think it's called the Museum of Neon Lights. That was on Art Beat. And the directors of that are meeting with us, and they need help. Some of it might be CNC help to reproduce some of the medallions that are part of the infrastructure, but they also have to restore a lot of the animals, and they're looking for carving help. And I don't know whether that's here or in the Dalles or somewhere in between or your own shop. But it's a major community project, and one that will have some local feet. Terry Burnside is working to put that together. I don't know when it will come together, but sometime between now and next Christmas, we'll have a focus on that. The Albany shop is a delight to look at. They have a separate carving studio and a separate painting studio, as does the Salem carousel. And doing a shop tour and meeting with Jack Giles to go through that is a delight. And if you haven't been there, go see it, right? On your way south to whatever you do, make it a appointment to stop in to see either the Albany or the Salem or both carousels. They're major activities that all involve carving. Okay, I'm going to pull the plug. Sorry for the long-winded closure. Rick, thank you very much for
Thank you, you guys.
I just want to thank everybody for being a part of this, and I appreciate the opportunity to, share a little bit that I know, and hopefully sometime I can, learn from you. I did want to share with you, if you're interested in our program, this is our our competition and show is the third weekend in September in Astoria. These were some of the birds and stuff from this year, and thank Larry and the Oregon Carvers Guild for putting this together. I learned a lot tonight, and I appreciate you inviting me. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And just another plug, this Columbia Flyway Show also has open categories besides birds and fish and mammals that take relief and some other and stylized carving. So it's really a great opportunity to show your work. And you ought to think about carving something that's exhibit quality and judgeable quality to put into that show itself. Yeah, thank you, Rick. I'm sorry I forgot that. That's an important message.
Okay, make sure you put my email address and my phone number there if anybody wants to contact me. If I can be a help or you want to help me, I'd love to visit with you.
We sure will.
Thank you, Rick and
Bye,
Larry.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you for staying up, Diane. 3 hours time zone difference. Ooh, okay. Take care, everybody.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Rick.